The wheels of struggle. Rafiq's grip tightened around the handlebars of his rickshaw as he maneuvered through the bustling streets of Dhaka. The tires of the rickshaw groaned as they rolled over potholes, but Rafiq's body had grown used to the rough ride. The sun was beating down on him relentlessly, its rays burning through his sweat-drenched clothes. Yet he didn't stop. Every passenger who climbed into his rickshaw was a potential meal for his family, his wife, Runa, and their 7-year-old son, Hassan. Life had never been easy for Rafiq, but he had learned to endure. He had to. Born in a small, impoverished village on the outskirts of Dhaka, Rafiq's life had been filled with hardship from the very beginning. His father had passed away when Rafiq was just 6 years old, leaving his mother to raise him on her own. His mother, a housemaid, worked tirelessly for meager wages, and even with her efforts, the family struggled to survive. Their small home was little more than a hut, with thin, crumbling walls and a leaky roof. There was never enough food to go around, and Rafiq could see the toll it took on his mother, who would often go without meals to ensure that he had something to eat. School had never been an option for Rafiq. As a child, he watched his friends go off to school with their books and uniforms, and he envied them. But as the eldest child, he knew he had to work to help his mother. At the age of 12, Rafiq left his village and moved to Dhaka in search of work. He started at a tea stall, serving customers tea and snacks for a few pennies, but the work was grueling, and the wages barely covered his expenses. Determined to make a living, Rafiq moved on to construction work, where he spent long hours under the hot sun carrying heavy loads of bricks and cement. His hands were calloused, his shoulders ached, and his back screamed with pain, but he kept going. The work was hard, but it was the only work he could find. One day, as Rafiq was riding his bicycle through the crowded streets of Dhaka, he passed by an old rickshaw that had been left on the side of the road for sale. The rickshaw was worn and rusty, its wooden frame cracked, but it was still functional. An idea struck Rafiq. He could buy this rickshaw, become a rickshaw puller, and make enough money to provide for his family. He borrowed a small sum of money from a friend and purchased the rickshaw, not knowing what the future held, but hoping that this new venture would bring him a better life. The first few days were difficult. The streets of Dhaka were congested and the air was thick with pollution. Rafiq pedaled through the streets, hauling passengers from one place to another, but it was hard work. The weight of the rickshaw and the heat of the sun drained him physically. Worse still, many passengers treated him with disdain. They would climb into his rickshaw without a second glance, tossing their fare at him like he was an insignificant part of the transaction. "Hurry up, rickshawala," they would shout as though he were nothing more than a machine to be used. "I'm paying you, so don't waste my time." But Rafiq did not complain. He had no choice. He had to keep working to provide for his family. Each evening, when he returned home, exhausted and sore, he was greeted by Runa, who always had a tired smile for him. Their small house was cramped, and the roof leaked when it rained. But it was home. Runa worked as a domestic helper for a wealthy family in the city, but her income was meager and barely enough to make ends meet. They lived day by day, always on the edge of financial ruin. Yet, no matter how little they had, Runa always made sure that Hassan had something to eat and clothes to wear. Hassan, their son, was different. From a young age, he was curious and ambitious. While Rafiq and Runa had never had the luxury of education, Hassan excelled in school. He would come home every day, excited to show his parents what he had learned, and Rafiq could see the spark of potential in his son's eyes. One evening, after dinner, Hassan looked up at his father with a hopeful expression. "Baba, I want to become a doctor," he said, his eyes wide with excitement. "I want to help people, like the doctors I see on TV." Rafiq felt a pang in his heart. His son had dreams, big dreams, dreams that seemed impossible. A doctor? With their current situation, it was unimaginable. Education in Dhaka was expensive, and Rafiq could barely afford to feed his family, let alone send his son to school, let alone medical school. But he couldn't bear to shatter his son's dreams. "You can be whatever you want, Hassan," Rafiq said, his voice filled with determination. "I will make sure of it." Runa, too, encouraged their son. She would tell him, "You study hard, Hassan. We may not have money, but we have love and dreams." For the next few years, Rafiq worked harder than ever. He woke up before dawn and rode his rickshaw through the streets until late at night. He would skip meals to save a little extra money, and often he would go to bed with an empty stomach. His body ached from the constant strain, but he kept going. He couldn't let his son down. Every time he thought about giving up, he would remember Hassan's face, full of hope, and he would keep pedaling. But life in Dhaka was unforgiving. The streets were crowded, and the traffic was chaotic. The passengers were often rude and dismissive. One evening, after a long day of work, Rafiq picked up a businessman from a fancy restaurant. The man climbed into the rickshaw without acknowledging Rafiq, his face buried in his phone. "Hurry up," the man muttered, not even bothering to look up. When they reached the destination, Rafiq called out the fare. "Sir, the fare is 150 taka." The businessman scoffed, his eyes narrowing. 150 taka? For this short ride? Are you kidding me? He handed Rafiq 100 taka and turned to leave. Rafiq hesitated, then spoke softly. "Sir, the fare is 150, please." The businessman glared at him and tossed a few coins at him, sneering. "You rickshaw pullers are all the same. You think you can charge us whatever you want? You people are all the same, just trying to get rich off the little people." Rafiq's heart sank as the man walked away, leaving him standing in the middle of the street, humiliated. He had never felt so small, so invisible, but he knew he couldn't let it break him. If he wanted his son to have a better life, he had to keep pushing forward. Years passed, and Hassan continued to excel in his studies. He worked hard, earning top marks in school, but the financial burden was starting to take its toll on Rafiq and Runa. They couldn't afford the cost of Hassan's education, but Rafiq refused to let his son's dreams die. He borrowed money from friends and family, working even longer hours to make ends meet. His body was breaking down, but he couldn't stop. One day, when Hassan was in his final year of high school, he came home with exciting news. "Baba, Mama, I got a scholarship, a full scholarship to medical school," he shouted, his eyes shining with joy. Rafiq could hardly believe it. After all the sacrifices, after all the hardships, his son had achieved his dream. Tears welled up in Rafiq's eyes, and he embraced his son tightly. "You did it, Hassan. I knew you could." Runa, too, wept with joy. "We always believed in you, Hassan," she said. "You're going to change the world." Hassan's scholarship covered his tuition and books, and soon he was enrolled in a prestigious medical school. He worked hard, just as his father had done all those years. And when he graduated, Hassan became a doctor, fulfilling his childhood dream. Rafiq could hardly contain his pride as he watched his son walk across the stage to receive his degree. Years later, Rafiq stood in the same streets that had once insulted him. He was no longer a rickshaw puller. His son had become a respected doctor, and their family had risen above the struggles they had once known. The road had been long, and the journey had been filled with pain, but it had led them to this moment. Rafiq had never given up, and now he could see that all his sacrifices had been worth it. Hassan, now a doctor, took his father's hand and said, "Baba, you don't need to work anymore. I'll take care of you." Tears streamed down Rafiq's face as he looked at his son, the man he had always hoped he would become. His journey was complete. The wheels of his rickshaw had carried him through a lifetime of struggle, but now they were done. His son had fulfilled the dreams he had once thought impossible. Moral of the story: hard work and sacrifice are never in vain. Dreams, no matter how big, can be realized with determination and perseverance.